No one could have predicted what would unfold that day on Flight 247. The flight was scheduled to travel from a bustling city to a quiet, upscale destination, and the cabin was filled with wealthy families, eager to begin their holidays. But amidst the luxury of first-class seats, there was one passenger who didn't quite fit the picture. His name was Jordan, a young black boy traveling alone. Sitting quietly by the window, Jordan stared out at the city below. He didn't say much, preferring the solitude of his thoughts. But something was different about today. As the flight attendant, a tall American woman named Sarah, walked past, her gaze lingered on Jordan. There was a certain coldness in her eyes that was impossible to ignore. What no one could have guessed, not even Jordan, was that his presence on this flight was about to cause a stir. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Sarah's harsh gaze turned into something more unsettling. She seemed to have already made up her mind about the young boy. But why? In the distance, a rich family settled into their first-class seats, their laughter echoing down the aisle. Jordan, despite his discomfort, remained calm. Little did he know, he was about to be caught in a conflict far bigger than a simple plane ride. The moment Sarah approached him, the tension in the air thickened. No one expected what would happen next. It wasn't unusual for flight attendants to do their rounds. But today, Sarah's steps toward Jordan were deliberate, almost predatory. As she neared him, she noticed the rich family in the front row looking back at the boy. The subtle exchange of glances between them was enough to set something in motion. Jordan sat with his head down, minding his own business. But Sarah's arrival was like a signal to others. With a forced smile, Sarah leaned down and spoke in a tone that was sharp but quiet. "This seat is for more important passengers," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Jordan looked up in confusion. He had been assigned this seat by the airline, so why was she speaking to him like this? Without waiting for a response, Sarah grabbed his arm. "You need to move," she barked. The whole cabin seemed to pause, as if the air itself held its breath. Jordan, though surprised, stood up. But instead of moving to a seat in the back as he expected, Sarah guided him to the very last row of the plane, the seat everyone else seemed to avoid. The ones meant for the least important passengers. As Jordan sat down, his face flushed with embarrassment. Passengers began to whisper, many of them casting curious glances. But no one dared to speak up. And that's when the whispers turned into something else. Something darker. It wasn't just the seat that bothered Jordan. It was the way Sarah treated him. As the flight progressed, she passed by him repeatedly. Each time, her gaze lingered longer, colder. And though the other passengers were distracted by their meals and entertainment, a growing tension filled the cabin. Sarah's attitude toward Jordan didn't seem like a simple mistake anymore. It was intentional. The moment that would change everything came quietly, like the calm before a storm. Sarah approached Jordan, this time with a tray of drinks in her hand. With no warning, she slapped the tray out of his hands, spilling soda across his lap. The cold drink soaked into his jeans, and for a moment, the entire cabin fell silent. Jordan flinched. He hadn't expected this kind of treatment, not from a professional. His heart raced, but he didn't react. Instead, he looked up at Sarah, confused and hurt. She didn't apologize. Instead, she sneered. "Maybe this will teach you to stay in your place." A gasp rippled through the cabin. Passengers looked from one another, unsure of what to do, but the phone cameras were already coming out. Someone was recording. It wasn't long before the footage was all over the internet. No one knew the storm was about to break. As the plane continued its journey, Jordan sat in the back, quiet but furious. He had never been treated this way before. He pulled out his phone, dialing the only person who could help him, his mother. In a soft voice, he began telling her everything, the unfair treatment, the slap, the insults. Jordan's mother, Miss Henry, was no ordinary woman. She was the owner of the airline. Powerful, influential, and someone who would never tolerate such disrespect toward her family. On the other end of the line, Miss Henry's calm voice cracked like a whip. "I'll take care of it. Stay calm. I'm on my way to make sure this gets fixed." As she hung up, Miss Henry's mind raced. This wasn't just a matter of poor service. It was personal. She had built her empire with respect for every person, regardless of their background. To hear her son being humiliated like this was unacceptable. A plan began to form, and with it, a promise that Sarah would regret this day. Back on the plane, the tension was unbearable. Jordan's humiliation had spread through the cabin like wildfire. The passengers who had initially stayed quiet were now murmuring among themselves, some in disbelief, others in anger. The video of Sarah's abuse was now circulating, with hundreds of people watching as the confrontation played out. Then, just as everyone thought the ordeal was over, the intercom crackled to life. The flight attendant's voice echoed through the cabin, but it wasn't Sarah's voice. "This is your captain speaking," the voice said, calm and authoritative. "We have an important announcement. Please remain seated." The passengers froze. What was going on? Had something happened to the plane? But the answer was something none of them could have predicted. The young man seated in the last row, Jordan, is not just a passenger. He is the son of Miss Henry, the owner of this airline. I repeat, he is the son of the airline's owner. A collective gasp swept through the cabin. The murmurs turned into shocked exclamations. Sarah, standing in the front of the plane, went pale. She had no idea. As the announcement rang out, Sarah's face twisted into an expression of horror. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her stomach dropped. The realization hit her like a freight train. She had just slapped the son of the airline's owner. And now, everyone on the plane knew. The passengers began to whisper among themselves, their eyes turning towards Sarah. The mood in the cabin shifted from one of discomfort to disbelief, then to quiet judgment. Sarah's usual confidence, which had been so apparent earlier, now seemed like a mask that was cracking in real time. Jordan, still sitting quietly in the back, looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, only the painful realization of what had just happened. He wasn't just another passenger. He was part of something much bigger than this plane. The plane began to feel smaller. The tension in the air was suffocating. Sarah stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. She had made a mistake, but it wasn't just any mistake. It was a monumental one. The woman who had once seemed so untouchable now looked like a figure caught in a web of her own making. Jordan didn't move. He simply sat there, letting the weight of the situation sink in. He had never wanted this kind of attention, but now that it was here, he knew what had to be done. Without a word, Jordan stood up and walked to the front of the plane. All eyes were on him as he made his way past the rows of stunned passengers. When he reached Sarah, she didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she looked down, avoiding the boy's eyes. "Do you have anything to say to me?" Jordan asked, his voice steady but filled with a quiet power. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She had no excuses. As the cabin waited in stunned silence, Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry," she said, though the words felt hollow. "I shouldn't have treated you like that. It was wrong. I'm sorry." Jordan, still standing in front of her, looked at her for a moment. Then, in a calm but firm voice, he responded, "I forgive you." The passengers, who had been watching intently, exhaled collectively. The moment of tension was finally over, but the damage had already been done. Jordan turned to face the rest of the cabin. "This shouldn't have happened," he began. "But what matters now is how we move forward. We need to see each other as human beings first, not by our race, not by our background, but by the way we treat each other." The entire cabin was silent, listening. Then, one by one, the passengers began to clap. First softly, then louder, until the applause filled the entire plane. It was a small victory in a larger battle, a victory for kindness, for humanity. In the aftermath, the story of what happened on Flight 247 spread across the world. News outlets picked up the footage of Jordan's confrontation, and the story quickly went viral. The incident sparked debates about racism, class, and the treatment of others. But more than that, it brought attention to the power of forgiveness and how one person's voice could change everything. Miss Henry, as the owner of the airline, took immediate action. Sarah was suspended and sent for sensitivity training, but it wasn't just about discipline. It was about changing hearts and minds. Jordan's quiet strength had already done more than anyone could have expected. The next time Jordan flew, things were different. The passengers, even the flight attendants, treated him with a respect he had never experienced before. The flight landed, and as the plane taxied to the gate, Jordan sat in his seat, feeling a quiet sense of pride. The ordeal was over, but the impact of his actions would last far beyond that day. As he stepped off the plane, a sense of calm washed over him. It was over, but for the passengers who had witnessed it all, and for Sarah, things would never be the same. Jordan had shown them all that humanity was worth more than class, race, or status. And in that moment, everyone on that plane knew one thing for sure: kindness would always win. And as for Jordan, he had just begun to make his mark on the world.